Okay. Hello, everyone. The title of tonight's episode. The title of tonight's episode is The Cruelty of Ignorance. And I want to speak about altered states of human behavior. There have been moments I have walked on this earth where I have felt that the world has been cruel. I have felt that the world was against me more than it was with me. I felt that the world did not care about my inner reality, as much as I cared for the outer reality, which was the world. There have been moments where I have felt I have been left behind by the world, and there have been moments I have felt I have been acknowledged by the world. However, cruelty has to do with one's natural expression being kind of unnaturally filtered. And so we as creatures, in some sense, segmented the moment into a spectrum of time. And we keep images of the moments we pass through, and those images are found to, in some sense, contribute to our next moment. I see cruelty, and my understanding of cruelty is that it occurs from dishonesty. And so the only resolution, and let me get to this, dishonesty occurs because of fear. That means if you notice, when many aspects and dimensions of your life are safe, when you know your feet are on, when you know you're safe from the sinking ship, you you have a sympathy for others, but in some sense, you don't care where you are not. And for me, the thing is that I am seeing a society that is playing a theatrical game of being very connected, being united. Yet, in that moment, we see there are people who justify their existence internally. And so, what that means is when people look at you, imagine right now you're walking and I see you. I see you on the street. When I see you, do you think that version of you that I'm seeing is actually you? And that's what I mean, that we start off from our own worlds, and it takes a bit of effort to, in some sense, step out of the things that you have thought that pretty much I'm saying you got to step out of fixed beliefs. And fixed beliefs are very unique because they come from evidence. And what that means is you find yourself in an embarrassing moment, let's say. I found myself in many, of course, when I was younger. Oh my God. I was kind of like, the stumbling fool with the kingly smile. And when you find yourself in a moment when your identification with that moment is rejected by aspects of the moment, you in some sense stop trying. And in some sense, the biggest source of cruelty on this planet is in some sense a sort of ignorance of people giving up on the presence of an integrative peace. For me, I'll be honest, I was just living my life. I didn't even think about peace, world peace, and caring for like some performance of the species. I thought we were just like a painting or like a candle that will melt at the end of time. I still have that view physically. But what has changed is that I have recognized the value of an opportunity. And the issue with the cruelty that comes from ignorance is that that ignorance cannot be there. Do you see? That means if you ask yourself, if I ask you, do you feel great in this moment or not? Let's say, like, few people say yes, most people say, no, I don't feel great, man. I'm hustling every day. It's a rough life. It's tough. And what do you mean feel great? Like, you think this is easy? Like people may have that approach. But what I'm kind of saying is that our decisions, whether we like it or not, There's an opportunity cost to our decisions. That means in this moment I have chosen to give this talk, it's 2 a.m. And I have not, for example, I have the opportunity cost of sleep, excuse me, the opportunity cost of sleep, for example, is being sacrificed for activity. So I'm trying to say that the sense of sacrifice, your sense of self-worth, will suggest how much the world is worth for yourself to exist in. So what I'm trying to get to is that I find that the fundamental issue of our civilization, and something that is in some sense causing violence and cruelty, and in some sense being a sort of anti-force to our current force, a sort of, you know, negative force upon our positive intentions of our future. Now, I don't want to say negative in the sense that bad things are happening. This life behaves in two ways. You can say pretty much in three. I'll say three just to be safe. It starts, it ends, and in the middle it changes. And so either the world is completely changing or it has a beginning and an end. Do you see? Either it's an infinite progression of stuff in space, or it is in some sense a simulation, as if we are a thought of some sort of unknown intelligence that is known to itself. That means imagine I have a thought right now of a person, and that person that I'm thinking realizes it is a thought but cannot tell that I am thinking it. Do you see? So I'm saying the same relationship that we have with our thoughts seems to be very close to the same relationship that God has with man. So when I looked at religious texts, I was like, wait a minute, could this be a deeper observation of how the experience of a mind has initiated on the surface of this planet? Because for me, things come and go. There's this very incredibly wise being who he's passed away now, but his name is Sri Ramana Maharshi, and he says something like, "Let go what goes, let come what comes, see what remains." And to see what remains means to acknowledge change, because everything I have seen in this life, even like girls I have in some sense momentarily fallen in love with, that moment has changed. And that is a very powerful realization that you are not just what you think, you are a changing moment, which means that the thoughts come and go. And when I say you're a changing moment, you can see that in a multidimensional way. That means, like, if Rene Descartes was listening to my talk, he'd kind of see that when I say the human being, the human aspect of it is unknown, and it is known, let's say human, the word human life. If Rene Descartes was hearing me explain the word human life, that in some sense the human part is is ascribed to form, and the life part is ascribed to the formless. So pretty much we come across to ourselves as this formless movement of intelligence in the waking state, and this formless movement of intelligence, it's as if the unknown is creating knowledge. As if where these words are actually coming from that I'm saying has to do with way more processes than logic can acknowledge. As if there are hidden dimensions at work that we cannot see. We are in many rooms at once. And that is the study of multiplicity. That is when multidimensionality becomes of interest to you. When you recognize that we are primarily functioning in stories. We are creatures that are in some sense beings, characters in stories to themselves, and these stories motivate you. And for example, I notice this: anytime a person becomes honest and speaks, they inject into the goal, into the civilization's veins, consciousness veins, a sort of, you don't understand how valuable it is to be honest. Because when you do, the illusions begin melting, as if you thought the snow was the only surface, but you see it is melting. And what that means is that the changes of the world, once you are self-aware, you begin seeing how yourself is changing in the moment, rather than constantly like making a to-do list of who you want to be. I remember when I was younger, I have made many to-do lists and to-be lists, I call them. I've literally made a list of things I want to be. But they were all just playfulness. They were kind of like me drawing in that moment a sort of future for myself. And yet that future was a very beautiful image, yet it's in reality, sometimes we cannot see where we're going. This is why nature is kind of like a roller coaster ride for an individualized consciousness. So there are many altered states. You can say that rather than, let's say you see your friend, and rather than say your friend is just one kind of person, just the friend you see, you can see that that is a being which in some sense comes across to us as a sophisticated combination of particles, atoms, that in some sense are found in a biological design. And then this biological design has somehow an ability to translate objectivity into subjectivity and beyond. That means as much as um, we are in the world is in us. As much as you are running towards truth, the whole world is running towards truth. And once you recognize this, I find that hard, actual, true enlightenment, especially for civilization's development, it's 2019 when I'm speaking. And in case you're hearing this talk, like 1,000 years in the future, I don't know. But this is the notion that we will not have an outcome based per se. We will have a sort of, it would be a sense of that's good juice right there I'm drinking. Anyways, it's a sense of community, guys. We're in a competitive animal mode still. This is probably going to stretch for maybe another like 200 years if we don't do anything about it. Sometimes when the past is moving too slow, the future intervenes. That means imagine we had this belief that whatever mistakes we make now, our future self will come back through time and fix it. You would kind of live in a world of no consequence, but you will see without limitations, the limitless will lose its meaning. Without the ugly, the beautiful cannot be noticed. Without death, life cannot be seen to be here. So we have made a sort of, I think people, remember, anything you fear, because you're keeping your attention on, you're indirectly worshiping. So you got to be careful about this, ladies and gentlemen. That in this life, whatever you fear, in some sense, your attention is stuck on. What that means is, like, there was this, very ruthless back in the day. Let's create a story for this point. Back in the day, there was this very brutal, vicious, violent person. And a stranger enters the town, and everybody in the town knew this guy was violent and a bit savage and kind of like, uh, through the eyes of civilization, a bit insane. This savage, cruel guy is just standing in town, and everybody's kind of away from him. And this traveler who's visited this village, this town, imagine this is back in the day, just walks in the town And without, before even noticing people are not around this guy, he walks and he walks up to this guy who nobody's a savage kind of guy, and he says, "Hey man, where's the thing? Where's the bar or something?" Like he says, he asks the question. And then the savage guy just looks at him like, grunting and like some savageness. And the guy just says, "Okay, what's up with this guy?" And he leaves. And that person does not share the reality of the people in the town. So he does not look down upon that person. Do you see? I find what friendship is the constant meeting of another soul where as your nature is expresses, their nature is being expressed, and you're kind of seeing the alignment of intelligence. That means your best friends are those who are kind of seeing the world very similar to you. But when you recognize the concept of you changes, then your best friend becomes all phenomena in the moment. Not that you blindly go, to like dangerous people and be like, "Yo, let's be friends." Like you don't. Uh, what I'm saying is that you can't. People are faceless in a changing world, so we cannot judge their face. And what I mean by that is that their internal personality is shifting by every condition and circumstance they meet. That means a person can be very saintly, in one environment, but go in another environment and be so uncomfortable that that person has, in some sense, already held the red lightsaber. So I'm telling you, there are modes to life. It is not just one thing. Nobody can teach you life because it is dynamic. It's like riding a horse. Nobody can teach you how to ride a horse. You just have to ride the horse. Do you see? Nobody can teach you how to drive a car. You just have to drive a car. Nobody can teach you how to, in some sense, find the clarity of your true nature. You just have to find the clarity of your true nature. You have to have a sort of, that's the power of honesty. It brings with it authentic interest. And through authentic interest, revelation becomes the moment. So most people feel like, man, right now in our current society, it is an interesting time. I call it the realm of ideal worship. So whoever that will be hearing my talk in the future, if my words reach your ear, dear future, we are living in a realm of ideal worship. Like, thousands of years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, there were people who came and saw some people worshiping objects like rocks, stones, as God, as their truth. And that person came and broke the idols of man's worship. But we find our current civilization is actually based on idea, based on concepts. So we worshipped first physical phenomena. Now we have moved to worshipping abstract. And those super mystical spiritual people have even moved further, and they are now worshipping emptiness. Do you see? I think Buddhists are worshipping emptiness. What I mean by that is that they are concluding that their attention has no quality. Um, no, no, no. I mean, I can't say it like that. I gotta probably say it. They're think. Of course, I can't speak for every person has different eyes, but what I find the Buddhist tradition begins sculpting the person as is one that acknowledges peace and acknowledges that truth is possible. That's the point of religions. They were just stories to just tell you that truth was possible, that your knowledge is has deeper roots in the unknown. Without religion, many philosophers would not ask their questions. So I find that we, the thing is, whether we like religion or not, it is like a person in our classroom. It's a classmate, and as religion is a classmate in our civilization, we have to respect it, but we have to also engage. Sometimes if you notice, like when lions play with one another, they're the kind that looks like they're being vicious, but when you pay more attention, you're like, no, they don't have that harsh intent, as if both creatures know there's no need to introduce death. And that's the problem, especially I find with immigration. of many people from different cultures to other cultures is the fixed resistance towards cultural integration, because cultural integration would mean a new modality, would mean a new culture developing, because two cultures, two people who've been looking at the world differently now are in the same kind of room in the same moment, and they have to live through an integrative vision. So what I mean is that we cannot ignore integration. What I mean is that I cannot ignore uh, what the world shows me. The content of my mind is not just, there was a man named Sadhguru. He said, the content of your mind is not your choice. I will tell you, it's not just the content of your mind that's not your choice. Your free will is born in a limited view. But in that limited view, through just like from a horizontal dimension, notices a vertical dimension, which is in some sense a limitless presence. So I'm telling you, most of people right now, because they're worshiping ideas, they think they're limited personalities. But I am telling you, we're actually limitless presence. We're because a duality exists. That's the beautiful thing about this world. That because there's duality, you can always see the other side. That means when some phenomena occurs in front of you, the moment you can see a sort of good or bad to it, if you define it as good, you can acknowledge a bad. So for me, it's kind of like I find mathematics can even be considered as divine, you know, because it went from zero, from nothing, to a zero to a room, as if let's say I think this is why scientists love mathematics, and why in some sense, I haven't read the book of course, but I have certain personal views on this book that I believe, what was his name, Isaac Newton wrote, which was Mathematica Principia Mathematica, you know. And of course he's describing the principles of mathematics, but what the significance of mathematics is that just like any language, it is a container of the unknown. We Symbols don't have any meaning, yet they hold meaning in our eyes. When somebody sees a stop sign, they're driving, it's like that's just a sign, that's just color on metal, right? And so, but some part of you suddenly notices this hexagonal symbol that is telling you to stop, you know? Hexagonal or octagonal, I don't know. But, so what I'm trying to get to with all this is that it's a strange situation. As Homo sapiens, as the evolved creatures we are, we have to take a responsibility for how much more evolved we are than our environment. So what that means is it's not just with great power comes great responsibility, with great sight comes great responsibility. And that's the thing about knowledge. This is why those people who've naturally been drawn to academia, and when I say academia, I don't mean like you going into a sort of regurgitating system of memorization so that a certificate can be given. You know, a person can memorize something without understanding it. And that is the flaw in an education that does not care how the education is received, but just cares about how it gives it, you know? When you find your presence, you feel your heartbeat through the whole moment. Movement becomes not just a process of neurology. You understand what you are is not a story. That is the profoundness of it. And the world is made of stories. Anything I ask you, you will tell me something based on a story. You have so many reference points behind your eyes that you don't realize. That if I say every word that I'm saying is in some sense falling into your um, uh, into your tunnel of dualities, in all the ways that you have felt the movement of chaos and order, the balance and the imbalance. So when you pay attention, you kind of become your attention. So this is why meditation, I don't know who said like don't have thoughts. You know, like whoever said that led people astray because it has nothing to do with thought. You shouldn't care about if you have thoughts or not when you meditate. In meditation is all about attention. And so your attention it pretty much means concentration. So when you keep your attention still, silent and stable, you feel and you see greater movement. You suddenly find a sort of fine tuned witnessing of the exact speed that many dimensions of the world move. So whether somebody says supernatural, I think you can say it's a supernatural. Somebody born with a blindfold, and when you take the blindfold off, you know that could be said to be a supernatural experience. I mean, we all know. Like, imagine somebody puts a blindfold and suddenly forgets where what everything is. And when they take off that blindfold, they're like, "Oh shit, there's a world here." You know, thank God. So what I mean by that is that there is higher intelligence that already knows what's going on before we as creatures began walking on this earth. And that knowing is not contained in concepts. That's why I'm fascinated that the gods were, even though conceptually were shared in image and symbol, they are not conceptual at their core. That means, like religion for me, I cannot even say I'm religious or not because when I try to comprehend religion, I am given a great riddle. I am given a great riddle that the source, the creator of the universe, is in and out of the universe at the same time, as if like we are the eyes of the puppet being moved by the strings of the divine, something like that. By the way, guys, if you're listening to this, these live streams don't happen. I mean, they happen through phases, I guess. But feel free to ask anything. You know, when if you're listening to me live, we gotta be honestly alive. So the cruelty of ignorance fades in the clarity of awareness or patience. It's very fascinating. When we are awake, our attention follows our physical senses. But when we are asleep, our attention follows, I'm going to say for now, our subjective senses. But I'm not going to say it as if, I'm going to tell you, I personally consider the only way we know that we're in a singular dimension because we know there's more than one dimension. I am telling you, we know because we know what we don't know. We can see what we don't know. We can see that we cannot see beyond the veil of thoughts. Now, what ancients called veil of thoughts, I call the language threshold. And it's a name that I take incredible pride with because I feel like it's a concept that, you know, there's a sort of beauty with originating an idea or receiving an idea that you have never heard, and you also feel perhaps no living being has also seen this idea in the way you have. This is why writing is powerful. That means for me, I would tell you, a civilization advances as healthy as its communication is. And the health of its communication is based on how honest the world of the being is. And that is where you will find your enlightenment, in the honesty that was never taken away from you, in the ability for you to be yourself and not to have the outside world constantly, the conditions of the outside world define your inner structure, the structure of your inner self, how you're being a person. You can be in a way on this earth where nothing outside of you has anything to do with what is behind your eyes. You as much as you see, like, you allow nature to just grow, you know, like no madman can imagine, like, you know, chaos will get tired and then balance will be ensued, because chaos is a slave to ignorance, and order is a servant of clarity. You comprehend these, your value structures begin to align. And for me, a good duality is like a good airplane. We navigate our plane of existence first subjectively, as you're hearing in this talk. We navigate it through duality. And what that means is, again, we see the edges of our world, and we see the edge of of this moment currently as we are in. One edge of it goes towards the limitless, one goes towards the limited, one goes towards the unknown, one goes towards the known. We find ourselves the central point where all our sensory perception is like an lines that are intersecting it. There is a way that we can be free on this world, but it has nothing to do with our beliefs. It has to do with how we are aware and how the self is in simulation subjectively and objectively evolved. For me, religion and science can live in in the same world, but they can live only in their self. They have to. It's like two different set dimensions of one, two different wings of the same bird. Science is bringing us towards the earth. Religion is taking us towards the sky. And I don't mean in regards to physically. Physically, it's the opposite. Science is taking us to the earth. Religion is keeping us in our earthly views. For me, the same way I find I am compassionate with people, I am also compassionate with ideas, because ideas make up the inner, again, the inner architecture of people's personalities. This is why when you're around children, you shouldn't talk much. You should perhaps just ask a question and hear the child speak, to allow the child to evolve its ability of communication. To be able to communicate is to be able to fly in the limitless sky, which our tiny pebble of a planet finds itself in, you know. Language is the skin of the ego. And guys, it's not that I'm telling you, like, you know, like, I'm not telling you like everybody's blinded by beliefs. It's not just like I'm saying that. I'm saying that, why put a box over your head? Why put a box over your head that is made of language, that is made of thoughts that are only beliefs, because their design cannot change? That means a believer, those people who are believers, they feel that they have to jump from pattern to pattern, from design to design. They believe, wow, they believe this because like here, it's kind of very fascinating, because the same ignorance that the scientist finds the religious folk to have, the religious person to have, is the same sort of ignorance that the religious person finds the scientist to have. How is it the same? Now, let me create a bridge between these two. The scientist sees a person, the religious person, as a person who has accepted too soon. And the religious person sees the scientist as the one who has accepted too late. Now, the issue is that each of their acceptance is based on a structure. And that structure, at its core, is held by an attributeless witness, which is the core of our being, which is the whole moment. That means uh, the whole moment is where your heart is beating, not just in your body. Now, we begin to see that psychology comes into place, and many of our justifications of our decisions are based on various dimensions. Sometimes they're based on what I like to call family or familiar dimensions. What we are familiar with, that we're comfortable, we trust, and we, in some sense, uphold their values. You see children who they have posters of like celebrities. You begin to see as they grow up and go into social gatherings and whatnot, those celebrities that they have seen, what they have idolized, they try to embody. They try to become an avatar of their subconscious view of the greatest. You see, this is why the ego is a noble effort. That means you can't just look at someone with an ego and be like, "What is this buffoon doing with his thoughts?" you like it's not. You can't just point out a disadvantage without also seeing an advantage. So let's kind of reverse engineer into these two modes of behavior, which one feels you are accepting too soon, and the other feels you're accepting too late. Now you can ascribe labels. One is religious, one is scientific approach, where it doesn't need to believe unless it is rational. Because I find Bertrand Russell to be a hero of many atheists, and I find him to be a hero of many atheists because him, similar to Francis Bacon, made a very important contribution that said that your beliefs should be based on rationality, and rationality has to do with observing, and observing has to do with testing. Because what you observe, you're engaging to see what happens, as if the same way you know, you can say a dog sniffs to see if like something's alive or not, is the same way that an experiment, you can say, or let me say it like this: the same way that a lion in some sense has to go kill its own prey. It doesn't just eat any other being's food. Is the same way that we can say the scientific approach chooses to in some way do its own observation. That means science doesn't say believe something, because it's this. Science says this is what we see of this world. This is how far we can see. Now you can choose to accept these ideas. But you see, religion asks for a greater commitment, and that greater commitment is necessary, which many atheists will be baffled by what I'm saying, you know, because that commitment is required to bring faith into the ideology. So I want you to imagine you're an idea that wants to live forever. What do? You ask for people, for those to pay attention to you, and you live along. So we see that eternity has to do with the engagement of life with that point of focus. This is why I'm saying if you, the easiest way to become healthy is to actually live life. Most people exist, I'm telling you, people exist in programs of unconscious behavior. Even me, even right now as I'm speaking, when I say unconscious behavior, I mean my life, even though right now, like, I stand as my presence, not my personality speaking to you. But there are many moments in this life where I have just been the product of the system. I see cultural systems at work. I see political systems at work. I see social systems at work. I see many systems at work, and these all become various dimensions that our civilization is in some sense generating its momentum through. You know, that means like when you push your car to get it going, it's not easy. You're like, wow, I got to do this complete thing, right? But when you do it and you have enough faith to see what the result is in some sense, how can I tell you, the same way that one begins developing the eyes of what I like to call the eyes of freedom and the eyes of the eyes of truth. So what I mean by this, the eyes of freedom and the eyes of truth, I mean that your sight stops judging this phenomena. It just observes. And it observes without having conclusions on what the observer is. That's the problem with the placebo effect, because it is just how language has limited our search. That is the issue of the placebo effect. In some sense, how we look at it influences how we see the results. And there's, again, I'm going to emphasize a bit more, as there's, like I said, cultural systems, political systems, social systems, many different sorts of systems based on the categories and the different group structures that exist on this planet. For me, I find that you require both. And in some sense, what the atheist community and the theist community are fighting over, not fighting, in some way, but having conversations over of great intensity, you know, great intensity and intense heat. Like, I've seen heated arguments between theists and atheists on YouTube. But what I'm trying to say is that you see that you need faith to open your eyes and see something, okay? You need faith to get off your chair and do an scientific observation experiment. But you also need observation to have faith in something. Do you see? So for me, trust me, we are all so similar, but we have built our civilization on our uniqueness. And that has had a good and bad effect. The good effect it has had is that it has led to inventions that have made our civilization efficient. But the same way that you can, I don't know how to tell you guys. I'm telling you, we're way too divided by language, and it's just ideal worship on a mass scale. Like, and there's no way out of it. We're all in the language simulation. We're all in a sort of subjective realm of meaning. And this subjective realm of meaning is so profound that when we look at beyond the skies, subjectively we can consider stars and planets beyond these skies, even though it could be cloudy and we could not see anything, you know. So the mind has an ability to see further into the object by imposing a sort of self-intelligence and self-interpretation upon it. So all of this that I'm explaining is to show you that when you're not honest, fear is activated. When fear is activated, ignorance arises because you're running away from fear. And fear could be standing in front of something important and you can run away from it. But to confront fear, I can't tell you how many times I've been trying to find the right thing to do, and the right thing to do was what I was afraid of. So I'm telling you, fear is like the dirt on top of that treasure chest, um, which is called truth. And once you push aside the fear, you become like, you don't know how liberating it is not to be constantly shackled by thoughts of self. I took, like, you don't understand. Enlightenment for me was just taking my head out of this uh, kind of illusion. And believe it or not, we need the illusion to get through the truth. So I'm telling you, those people who feel there's something wrong will constantly try to do something right. And either way, whether you're trying to be a bad guy or good guy, you're blind. That's the issue. You're not blind. I mean, like, there's ignorance. You're not seeing the other side when you're trying to be one side. This is why the mob mentality can exist. The mob mentality, as we see in when you look at history. For me, when I was in school and they were giving me history lessons of, like Nazi Germany and all this, I was like, wow, look at how far humans went. And human beings have not just, we have gone far, in both forests of chaos and forests of order. We have done, our species as creatures, we have hurt one another in ways that if other animals had minds as evolved as us, they could, like, the other animals cannot fathom. A lion just bites the gazelle's neck, but we create nuclear bombs that destroy cities. Like, holy shit, do you see the intensity of the violence? As if you have given, a child a weapon, and that child doesn't even know what it's doing, doesn't even know it has a weapon. It is so blinded by a sort of selfish egotism that I am like, dear human beings, we're 8 billion. There's 8 billion of us here. We're not just objects. We're not just bodies. We're not just overpopulation. We are an overpopulation of worlds. We are 8 billion minds and growing. And each mind is an intersection of many worlds, many memories, many abstract points of vision and lines of vision. Because, guys, I'm telling you, I have this is again in my own personal domain that I have. I believe geometry is the next great language of all languages. And so my thoughts, after for many years dwelling only in a language based structure, are now beginning to have a sort of geometrical existence. So, through the repetition of language, we begin to see a sort of how can I tell you? You begin to see patterns, geometrical patterns. You like the same way I'm talking about you being the present moment, and in some sense your whole moment and all the aspects within it is like geometrically. That's like one point in 3 dimensions. You can visualize at least, where many different lines from many different angles are intersecting at that same point. So you see suddenly a geometrical existence has been made in another dimension for the objective or for the subjective. So for me, it's kind of becoming something very unique. I believe there's a dimension of pure geometry, just like how scientists, for example, of course, they've given a sort of geometric structure to the atom, but I'm telling you, geometry is divine. Let me tell you why. In Plato's Academy or the School of Athens, these places, like 3D shapes, like this cube or a sphere, these were seen as sacred. They were seen as things that, I mean, of course, like, they were overreacting back then, but what could they do, And so geometry, in some sense, is divine because it is what is beyond thought and language. It's like an intermediary dimension between language and matter. That's what geometry is. Its designs go in accordance with matter, but just the emptiness of the shape goes with the mind. when I look at this picture, sometimes the cruelty of ignorance could be someone running away from somewhere and finding themselves in a place where the way they were cruel in a personal dimension being echoed in an impersonal way, as if you hurt someone and then you feel the whole cosmos is trying to hurt you because you hurt someone, you know. So that's the thing. Our minds are not just powerful, they are the edge of the universe. And as we walk through altered states, I'm going to share one last thing, that in the Ribu Gita, this is an ancient Vedic text, like something like as close to scripture, you can say, to the Vedic tradition. Um, and in the Ribu Gita, there's an idea that comes across in this, that they say there are four states in just your existence, like you're in like how you experience existence. There's four states. One state is the waking state. That's where I'm talking to you right now. Me and you are in the waking state, you know, or at least you're hearing a recording of me in my waking state. And then there is the sleep state, the deep sleep state, as if you go into bed and suddenly, like, there's nothing. There's no awareness that you're even aware. Okay, this is at first thought, but when you begin to seeing through the eyes of your presence, the eyes of your presence were never closed. It's kind of like the eternal dimension at the edge of the temporary. And so there's the waking state, there's the deep sleep state. In deep sleep state, there's no ego. Like you can't feel. There's nobody feels guilty when they're in deep sleep. And then there's the dream state, and the dream state is magnificent. Because the dream state is how, when your body is inactive, your mind still is active. And your mind can simulate a world where in dreams I have consciously moved, and I'm like, what is moving this? You know, and I realize that it is in some sense uh, the smile of the soul that is moving the dream. But anyways, I'm being poetic here, but there's the dream state. So these are three basic states. Now, most people would think that the experience of existence, just ends at these three states. You're either awake, you're either sleeping, or you're either dreaming. You know, and you're in these three states, and sometimes you can even dream when you're awake, but that's for another talk, you know? So these three states are actually, could relate to this. So these three states, um, the Ribu Gita suggests a fourth state. And the fourth state is the witness of all these three states. It is the presence of intelligence in the world that is being you. And that is no little thing. It is so cosmically vast that thoughts could never rule man. Authenticity, sincerity, these are the best spirit guides. These are how your spirit guides itself. So thanks for listening, guys. It says there's one person watching. Um, Feel free to ask a question or say something, man. Like, you know. Okay. Guess silence is its own wisdom. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.